Welcome to my sewing room. I've had several requests on the Henley Placket, and I've got it on, and I'm going to go ahead and do this because it's basically a one-ended welt pocket. It's kind of how I look at it. So if you think of it in those terms, you'll see it's really pretty easy. So we'll go step by step, but the Henley Placket, just to make sure we understand, it's just a button down that only goes a certain way into a woven or a knit shirt. It isn't the collar because you can have a mandarin collar on it. A collar is actually the piece that goes around just to kind of differentiate. It's the Henley Placket. We can have a mandarin collar, we can have a convertible collar, etc. Knit ribbed collar, but the placket itself is then adjoined to the collar. So I'm going to show you how to do the placket, and then you can always change around whatever collar you decide you want to. Alright, so let's go to the machine. And what I've done is, this is a knit top, and again, you can do these knit versus woven, woven versus knit. You can do them lots of different ways. I chose a knit body and I chose a woven collar. So just the prep work involved, which I did just before when I was cutting this out. This is our pattern 225. It's called Sarah's top that I'm working with. And it has a dot on the pattern. So what I did is, it's cut on the fold, but there's a dot, and I just sliced it down to the dot. So you can see that slice has already been done. You don't actually have to do that ahead of time. You could do it after this is done, but I think it's a little easier to do it ahead of time. And obviously there's modifications you can make, and you can decide what all those are. And then that's the placket. And what I did with the placket is I folded it in half and pressed it, and then I turned 1/2 inch under each. There's two plackets, and I did both of them the same. They're going to lay on top of each other. I'll show you how to do that. But again, fold in half, and then 1/2 inch under and 1/2 inch under. I've seen methods and in the industry where they don't actually pre-press the plackets, and I think that the reason I do is because it is like a welt pocket. You want as little manipulation as possible to take place once you've sewn. And so what you're going to see as these are pressed in place, they're just easier to manipulate. So I'm going to take the first placket and I'm going to do it, I'm actually on the right side. I'm going to call this the right side. I know we're looking at it, it's on our left, but it's actually the right side. And I'm just going to lay that down to be the right side against the right side and just start stitching. So actually what it is it's like a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you can see that my fold line actually becomes my guide to where I just literally keep right on that fold line. Notice that this is where the clip is too, and I'm going to sew just a little bit beyond the clip, and then I'm going to backstitch. Alright, and that's it. It's about as hard as it gets. When I decide to trim the threads, I've backstitched, so I have a habit of just going all the way to those and clipping that off just right there. I don't leave any threads hanging. I think it starts to get messy if you do. But I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. I've got the right side of this little extension against the right side of the blouse, and I go ahead and I'm going to stitch that all the way down. It is important. It's one thing I love about this table. These Sew Steady tables are amazing because you can keep the whole project flat. And what I'm going to say here is, what you want is to stitch both of these sections, just like in a welt pocket, the same length. You don't want one longer than another, or your placket won't be straight across the bottom. And then give it a back stitch. You'll know your machine, you'll know whether it will take one more stitch, two more stitches once you hit that back stitch button. But again, here we'll look at that. Alright, then it's just really a folding exercise, but just before I start to fold, I'm going to turn it over. Now I'm stitching in a contrasting thread. I would assume you guys know that you're not going to want to stitch in a contrasting thread. You're going to want it all to match. And I'm just going to come here and I'm going to clip right to that point. And I'm going to clip right. This is a great excuse to buy a new pair of nice sharp scissors, because what you don't want to do is chew the point. And I'm going to clip just to that point. And anytime you're clipping to a point, what you recognize is that you got to clip to and not through. It's got to go to and not through. So nice sharp scissors, bam, one point. Okay, see, and if you look at it like this, it's just the end of a welt pocket. You could leave that triangle a little longer, that would help you. I'm going to turn it back over to the front. Except remember, I've only got one end to do now. And all this is going to do is it's going to wrap around to where that goes to the back. And you're going to tuck it inside. It's going to be able to be tucked inside because I don't know if it's easier to work from the front to the back. I kind of work from both because that is cut across the bottom, and so it will tuck in. So you see that there is the placket. Now I'm looking at the wrong side, and this is just going to wrap around there. What I'm going to do is I want to pull this slightly past that stitch line, so that because I'm going to stitch it from the front side, I want to make sure I catch the back side. So let me go ahead. That pin was way too fat to get in there. I'm going to just stick a little pin right there so I make sure this doesn't slip out from being past the stitching point. And I'm going to do that on the other side also. You could put pins in the front. It wouldn't make a difference as long as you're securing that when you go to wrap this around, I want this side, this folded edge, just a little bit past that point. I'm not going to fold this side. I'm not going to pin this side. I'll show you how to kind of do it another way. Okay, I've got this side pinned, and so I can clearly see from the front side that the back of this is beyond where I'm going to stitch, and where I'm going to stitch is, it's called edge stitching, but I'm inside the part that I printed. I put the pin at the bottom so I could just pull it out. And again, it was just a marker so that I knew when I'm stitching from the front that I'm actually catching the back. That's the goal. I don't have to stitch all the way down because the bottom of the placket is going to have a little kind of an X on it, so don't feel like you have to go all the way. You don't. You got a little bit of an error factor there. And again, I'm stitching in contrasting fabric. You all will not. And you can see I cut it on the back because I had those pins in place and I knew I was catching it. So those pins will just kind of give you a guide and just make sure that you're not worried about whether it's working or not. And then this side I'm going to do the same thing. I didn't pin this side. The reason I didn't pin this side is I trust my pressing. And also what I can do as I do this side, you can kind of feel with your finger that the edge of the placket underneath is beyond where it, where you're stitching. So you can do the pin if you feel more comfortable with the pin and having it in place, whatever way you feel comfortable with, or you can just do it because I can kind of feel over here that that placket is already where it's supposed to go. And again, I'm going to pick it up with kind of an X marked on this. There's the pattern and the way we've done it, so I don't have to actually stitch all the way. And so you can see there's no advantage to either side. They're really done the same. It's just a matter of experience to where you feel like a pin will help you get there. Obviously, if you always use the pin, you'll never get there, but either way you can decide. Okay, so what I do now is I push all this to the inside, and what you're going to decide is it men's or women? And with men, just like with shirts and buttons, I'm going to press that down so you can kind of see that a little bit better. Push it down. Which side goes on top? On women's it's like this, with men's it's like this. The placket allows you to do either one. Obviously, because this is my shirt, I'm going to overlap this as if it was a woman's, and then I just have the end to do. I'm going to put a pin here so that I can keep this portion just aligned right there, so that when I pull this portion down, I'll do it to the inside. I want to make sure it's all straight. Put all the layers in there, make sure I catch everything correctly. Now that it's straight, all I'm going to do is flip it up, and I'm going to stitch over the bottom, and that pin in there just kind of helps keep everything aligned until I've stitched across the bottom. And I'm just stitching apart the widest part of this fat, the little triangle there. Just stitch apart the very fattest part, and then you can see how nice and flat it is across the front. Now to finish this, what I'm going to do is, this is where I said it didn't have to be perfect, because I'm going to come in and stabilize all this. And you're going to stitch a rectangle. This is completely optional, you don't have to. And again, in the beginning I said you didn't have to stitch all the way down because the stitching is going to come up and meet anyway. And that part gets somewhat overstitched. So I'm just going to stitch the rectangle. Then once that rectangle is stitched, I'm going to stitch an X. I just eyeball it. You could certainly mark it if you want. And some of this, because you're stitching the X, is going to be double stitched anyway. And then I do my last stitch. Just because I've done quite a few of these, I always take it back to the stitch I started with, which you can see my starting stitch was over here. And that's the placket. Pretty simple to do. Like I said, it's like a one-ended welt pocket. I'm going to clip all these threads. I'm going to take the pin out so that you can see all the functional parts. You've got some options. You could stitch along this edge there so that both edges were stitched. I don't know that I would, because truly when it's in the same color, you don't see that stitching. If it would have been in white, which is what I would recommend, all of the stitching isn't near as obvious as what it is now. So then now you're free to go ahead and put whatever collar you want to at the top. But that's our Henley Placket. Our goal is to help you have happy sewing. And whenever you have good methods, your sewing is always a little bit happier. So happy sewing from Silhouette Patterns.